Hello. So far on the previous videos, we saw variables which store data. We saw conditions which makes decisions in a program, and loops, which is a way to repeat actions. So now we are going to see functions, which is how we organize code. This is where functions come in. So here we are in Google Colab already. So let's dive right in and creating a first function. So def greet print welcome aboard. So this is the syntax for creating a function. Def creates a function, and then greet is the name I gave this function I created. And then what does my function do? It does executes the block of codes that is indented inside of it. So in this case, when I call this function, it will print welcome aboard. So if I run this cell, looks like nothing happens because we just created the function. We did not call it. So let's add another cell, and now we call it like this. And if we run this cell, boom, welcome aboard. Functions can receive data. These are called parameters. Let's do a little example of that. Def crew member name comma so just as before, we defined our function with this name, and then this is the parameter. We named it name, but this we could have named it whatever we want. And then what's in the block, indented block, it's what's going to be executed once we call the function. So outside the block, let's call it crew member. Now if we run it like this, it's going to shout at us because it is expecting a parameter. Type error, crew member missing one required positional argument name. So it requires the parameter. So let's call it like this. There, Luffy joined the crew. And then, for example, we can reuse our function like we can use it 3 times on the same code, right? Like this. So it called our one function 3 times and executed the block print, the parameter, and joined the crew like that. So just some terminology detail. Inside the function, name is the parameter, and when calling the function, Luffy is the argument. Also, functions can receive multiple parameters or multiple values. So let's do an example of that. We define a function called bounty, and now we require name and amount. call print name, comma, has a bounty of, comma, amount. Now let's run this cell. Now let's call it a few times. Bounty Luffy. I'll just make this up. 30,000. And bounty Zoro. I don't know what's his bounty. There, Luffy has a bounty of 30,000 berries, and Zoro has a bounty of 1,111. So parameters take data into the block of the function to be used, but functions can also send data back, and this is with a return. Let's see an example of that. Simple. Define our function add a comma b, and then return a plus b. That's it. So again, if we call our function without parameters, it's going to shout at us, right? So it needs 10, 20. If we run it, there we see 30. Here in Google Colab, we can get away with just putting the add 1020 and hitting run, and shows the return value. On regular Python code, we would not have seen anything because the return value doesn't get printed. So we would have needed to add a print at something like this, which we get the same 30. The same way, for example, if we want to assign what our function returns to a variable, result equals this, and then we don't see anything, right? But if we print the result, we get the 30. And in Google Colab, we can just say result, and it will print what this returns. Here, 30. So printing and returning are different things, right? In the previous example, our functions printed stuff, like if we just, for example, print a plus b, and then we call add with 10 and 20, for example, the function prints 30. But if we now, what happens if we assign the return and there is no return, right? So result equals this. So now if we print the result, now we get now we get none. The function, what's going on? The function gets called and prints a plus b, so that's why it prints 30. And then the the result prints none. Here, let me show you. Print, this is printed from the function. Comma. Okay, now, so here, this gets printed because it's the function it's called here, so it executes this print statement, but then it does not return anything, so that's why the print result, so the return value is so that's why print the return value is none, because when we execute this, it does not return anything. So if we exactly return a plus b, now when we run all, so here prints, this is printed from the function, and the return value is, and the return value is 30, because now we are printing a plus b on the function and then returning a plus b. So variables created inside a function stay inside a function. For example, captain equals Luffy we call it print Luffy, but then if I run another cell and then we print captain, see, we got a squiggly line because it does not know what captain is. Name error. Name captain is not defined because captain was created inside the function pirate, so outside of it, it does not know what it means. This is called scope. Variables inside functions are local by default. So now let's do a little example using an if inside the function. Now, if berries is greater than or equal to 100, now return so this is another important thing about functions, and this is used a lot in my experience, in my beginner experience. If this condition evaluates to true, then what's inside the if statement in its block, it's a return value. So it automatically returns this, and this exits the function. If this evaluates to false, it will skip this block, so this will not be executed, and this return will be executed, and it will print, it will return this, it will not print, I'm sorry, it will return this string or return this string. It will not print anything, it just returns a string, which in the case of Colab, it does show the output of the function even if you don't print it. But let's run this block, and then let's call it, and result equals there, buy meat 100 berries. Let's make it clear, 150 berries, and then print the result. So prints enough berries. So now let's run it with 50 berries. So we run the function buy meat with 50 berries, and then our result is not enough berries. Now let's do a little example with a function and the loop. So we define a function print name, comma, joined. And that's our function. Let's run it. Nothing happens. So now let's combine it with a for loop. And this is a list or an array, which we have not seen them. We will see them in the next video. But it's a nice way to show an example of this. So this is the crew, Luffy, Zoro, Nami. Now for member, and this, or like yesterday we did for I in crew, we can do, this is a variable we decide for member in crew. We call the function announce, and we call it with each member. So let's run this and see what happens. Luffy joined, Zoro joined, Nami joined. So functions organize logic into reusable pieces. This is one of the biggest or most important parts about programming, I think. So I think that will be it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.